So in my life, there's only been a few times that I've ever looked back and thought, well, I really could have been killed or something. And this story is one of them. So it was back in 2010 and I just started college. I had arrived pretty early as I figured traffic would be much worse than it turned out to be, and to kill some time I decided to go to a Walmart across the street. After shopping some MTG and buying some food, I made my way out, and once I stepped off to the curb, a man stopped me. This guy was probably between his late 30s and early 40s and pretty unkempt looking, ripped jeans that looked old, a shirt that was faded and looked like it once had a design or writing on it, and a baseball cap that appeared to be the only somewhat new thing that he had on. Once he stopped me, he started up with, "Hey man, I hate to be a bother, but I was doing some construction work up the road and my truck ran out of gas. Can you help me out and drive with me to the gas station? I'm alone and I'm pretty desperate." Obviously, that seemed pretty sketchy, so I instead offered to give him $10 that I had on me, thinking that it might really be a guy down on his luck. To my surprise, he immediately shot down my offer and instead just continued to insist that I instead let him drive me to the gas station in his truck, pay for his gas, and then he'd drive me back. Needless to say, this all seemed incredibly bizarre, and I just told him no and that I was in a hurry. Instead of leaving it alone, he began to tell me, "Man, come on, I'm all alone here and my truck is on E. I'm just stranded here by myself." When I continued to walk away, he began to try and grab at my arm while continuing to beg. I realized quickly that the way that we were positioned, every time that he went to grab at me and I walked away, he was leading me more and more away from the store and more towards the parking lot, which was not very full this early in the morning. Not wanting to let him keep leading me away, I walked back towards the store and I said that I had something that I forgot inside. Man, instead of following me, he pretty quickly backed off once I made it to the doors. I think he didn't want to go inside and risk others seeing him. Now, I know that this may sound like overreacting, but at this point, I was freaking out. I had never had someone actually try and grab me like that, and every bad scenario was just running in my head. Not wanting him to do this with anyone else, I alerted the front desk of what was going on, and they said that they'd handle it. Honestly, I don't know if they did or didn't, because I just quickly went for the other exit and nearly ran into my car. Once I was in my car, I noticed that he was walking away from his spot, and I assumed that either they had kicked him out or he was simply admitting defeat for the day. I was curious though, so I watched him walk to the back of the parking lot and get into his truck. And my heart sank when he pulled away, and I noticed two heads pop up from the back seats, as if they were hiding out of view until the car was moving. And to make matters even more sketchy, he didn't pull into the nearest gas station, and instead pulled straight onto the highway. Obviously not something someone alone and running out of gas would do, right? Fast forward 2 days later, and I stop at the Walmart, and what do I find? Yep, it was him. Still there, and still giving the same story about being stranded and needing someone to come with him. This time, instead of telling the store, I just immediately called the police. I don't know if he recognized me and saw me on the phone or what, but he left pretty soon after that, and I never saw him in the parking lot again. So I've lived in the same house with my family about 5 years now, I think, and there was nothing out of the ordinary going on. That is, until about 3 months ago. So the first thing that happened was all my pictures in my bedroom just were turned left, all at the exact same angle. I didn't want to assume anything, so I just kind of went with it. I thought that it could have been someone trying to play a prank. About a week later, I woke up around 2 in the morning and decided to get a drink. I was in the middle of the kitchen when I started hearing my name being called out around the house. It was really loud and completely unmistakable, and it sounded deep, but not like my dad or my brother's voice. I looked around the house, but didn't see anyone, so in the end, I just decided to go into their rooms, but both of them were asleep. I went to bed just telling myself that I must have imagined things, and eventually I ignored it, and it stopped until about 2 weeks ago. I woke up hearing someone in the bathroom right next to my room, I thought it was my brother, so I tried to ignore it. It sounded like someone was punching the wall and slamming cabinets, and after 5 minutes they would run through the hallway and go back into the bathroom. This went on for about 30 minutes too, and eventually I texted my brother telling him to be quiet because it was about 4 in the morning, but he FaceTimed me and said that he thought that it was me, and I got up to go and check it out, and as soon as I got up, the light in the bathroom just shut off and everything just went quiet. I asked my parents about it the next day, and they said that they didn't hear anything. A day later, around 3 in the morning, my mum texted me just over and over and over telling me and my brother to be quiet. I texted her that I'm in bed and told her that I was asleep, and she said that it sounded like me and my brother were arguing, basically yelling at each other in the kitchen, but she couldn't make out what we were saying. Still, I didn't want to assume the worst, so I let it be, and around an hour later, my brother calls me over and asks if something happened. I say no and ask him why, and he thinks so, and he tells me that it sounds like my mum is yelling at me from the doorway. I stared awkwardly at my doorway for what must have been about 5 minutes, and then he texts me and tells me that it stopped. We kept hearing voices too, but thankfully the bathroom stuff seemed to have stopped. But then, out of a deep sleep, around 12 in the morning, my dog runs under my bed with his tail between his legs. I kept calling him and trying to get him to come out, but he was absolutely terrified. I continued playing my PlayStation on my bed, but a couple of minutes later, knocking and low growling started coming from my doorway. About a minute later, it stopped. As soon as it stopped too, my dog went out and onto my bed and slept like nothing happened. But 5 minutes later, something began hitting my door and my doorknob. My door was unlocked, but it just kept moving it like it wouldn't open. I got up to open it, and as soon as my feet hit the ground, it just stopped. I opened the door and looked around the hall with my phone, but there was nothing there. My brother texted me about it before I could even ask him about it, so I know that I didn't imagine it. I asked my parents about it when we were eating dinner, but my mum said that my dad was asleep and she was reading and didn't hear anything. And then it comes to today. So I was doing my homework when I went into the kitchen for a drink, and I swear to you that I saw a little boy who looked to be about 6 running right towards me. I immediately jumped out of the way and turned around and watched him run straight into the laundry room. I was shocked because I don't have any younger siblings or anything, and this was the first time that I had actually seen something, so I ran in to see if he was still there, but when I got there, it was completely empty. Eventually, my brother came home and he showed me some deep scratches all over his thigh. He said that he woke up from the burning and checked the time, and it was about an hour after the growling, and a couple of hours later, we're each sitting in our rooms, and my brother runs into mine, obviously terrified. He tells me that he saw a young girl with black hair and a black dress sitting on his bed, and an elderly woman with white hair and a black dress looking at his window. He said that he froze in the doorway, and then he blinked, and they were gone. I've never had something like this happen to me in any house, ever, and I never do anything to tease spirits or anything, or I don't mess with Ouija boards or anything like that. And to be honest, I'm just completely lost because everything just began kind of out of the blue. So, for a bit of context, I was 5 when we moved into this house. We lived there my entire childhood and had many strange things happen. It was a log cabin built in the 70s, and the owner was a really mean old man that didn't have any friends or family. And well, what family he did have, he was awful to them, so they just were never around him. He lived there all the way up until he died in the 90s too, but now since you have a little background, I can get on with the story. So one summer night, when I was about 10, my mum, her then boyfriend, and a couple of friends decided to go out. My cousin, who lived right down the street, was in charge of me. My cousin, who we'll call S, decides that she wants to call her boyfriend. And while waiting forever for her to get off the phone, I actually fell asleep because I was so bored. Before I did, though, I made her promise me that she would wake me up so that we could go back to her house. I was asleep maybe an hour or two, I suppose, when I woke up scared and just shaking. I didn't know why, but I just felt like something was really wrong. I get out of my bed and I go look for my cousin. To my dismay, she was gone and I was home alone. And now, I was definitely scared, but I decided that I would just ignore it and I would just go back to bed. I thought to myself that maybe I was just freaking myself out because I was home alone and it was late at night. When I lay down, I'm trying to calm myself down when I hear what sounds like heavy footsteps or boots stomping around in my bathroom. I laid there, listening intently, heart beating through my chest. Whoever this was walked from the bathroom, down the hallway, past my room and into my mum's room. When they got to my mum's room, they would turn around and just come back, like they were anxiously pacing or something. In my head, I know that nobody is home but me, so I get curious and I poke my head out from under the covers, and that was when I got the most terrifying shock of my young life. Standing right next to my bed, glaring at me, was a tall, lanky, evil-looking old man. He had his arms crossed and was standing there just glaring at me with the most evil scowl I've ever seen. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and his scowl slowly turns into a maniacal smile. And that's when I realized that I've seen this man somewhere before. It's at this moment that I realized that this is the man that built our house and actually died in it. I jumped up from my bed, opened the front door, and I ran down the street screaming and crying my lungs out. When I get to S's house, I explained to her what just happened, because, you see, this man was her half-brother's grandpa, and she told me that he was a miserable man that never liked company and definitely never wanted anyone else to ever move into that house. And guess where he died? Yep, my bedroom. Needless to say, I never stayed home alone again after that, and we lived there for another 13 years. My mum and my brother both had weird things happen to them when they were alone there too. But they would hear someone stomping down the hallway, lights would flicker and explode for just no reason, and pictures would fall as if they'd been jerked from the wall. I also had another friend that swears that she saw him rocking back and forth in our rocking chair. She says that she was awoken out of a sound sleep and had the feeling that she was just being watched. And when she looked to her left, she saw him just glaring at her, and then he pointed to the door. She took that as a warning to get out, and that is exactly what she did. She never came back to spend the night again, and neither did any of my other friends. I'm really glad that we don't live there anymore, and I bet that man is still roaming those hallways, making sure that nobody else moves into his beloved house. My mum has worked in the same nursing home for the past 20 years and has had a few experiences there. The home has 2 floors, a basement, and an attic. Long hallways connect to the residence home, sharply branching left and right at the end, and at the other end is the kitchen and the dining room. For reference too, at the end of the hallway to the right is the storage and cleaning supplies room. No resident rooms on that side. So one night, my mum was working late and had to go and get something from the supply cupboard. She turned the corner from the kitchen to head up the long hallway. She has MS, so has to be careful walking, so tends to look at the floor while doing so. As she's walking, she glances up and sees what looks like the bottom of an old Victorian red dress go around the corner to the right, near the floor, rather quickly. Obviously, sometimes residents can wander at night, but none could turn around the corner that quickly. But she continues up because, well, you never know, and lo and behold, no one is there, and the only 3 doors down there are all still locked. I don't think she got the supplies that she needed that night, and she just noped out of there. On another occasion, it was Christmas time, and my mum was going to go up to the attic and get Christmas napkins and all that sort of stuff. None of the staff like going up there because there's always been an eerie feeling, and they usually go up in pairs. On a side note, my mum took me up when I was a teenager, and it definitely was a creepy vibe. But for whatever reason, she had to go up by herself this time. As you can imagine, the attic is actually pretty large here. At the opposite end from the elevator is where all the junk that they don't use gets put, and no one really goes up there, pretty much ever. So my mum's been up there for about 5 minutes at this point, gathering whatever she needs, when she hears a rustling behind her. She stopped and paid attention for a second when, all of a sudden, there's a loud bang from behind the junk with just no explanation. And again, she got out of there quick smart. There were other things too, like the usual stuff, hearing footsteps behind her, turning around and no one's there. Apparently that happens a lot. I don't know how much of a coincidence this is too, but when the residents pass away, it's always in threes. Like, one will pass and everyone is like, well no, 2 more are going to go soon, and they always do. Then no one will pass for weeks and months, and as soon as one goes, so do another 2. It's really strange, but it always seems to happen that way. My mum tells me too that most of the staff there have had some weird experiences, but I don't know this story, so I can't verify anything. I would also like to know if anyone else has heard of this stuff, like the residents passing in threes. I would really like to know if anyone else has ever experienced anything like this. G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.